To those of you staring at me with those glasses, it ain't going to make me look any younger than 68. What you see is what you get. We're talking angels. Okay. I'm not sure if each of you has certain times of the year that kind of grab your heart and soul more than others. To me, the first part of December is always, I'm not sure, it's kind of a crossroads time. Maybe it's because we just had Thanksgiving, which is kind of the lost holiday. And now winter is beginning to show itself. And Christmas is almost here. And I remember when I was younger, and especially when I was a younger minister, I always wanted Christmas to be perfect. I wanted everybody to be home for the holiday. I wanted everybody to get along. I've learned that ain't going to happen. I wanted things at the church to be just right. And I guess that's because Christmas was a holiday. There were parties and gatherings, and in many ways, especially in the church, Christmas can easily become a performance. But maybe it was about 10 years ago, and it's ironic because the one name we forgot to put in the bulletin is the one name that kind of changed my life a long time ago. And it was about 10 years ago, and Blair Kelch's wife, Dawn, was in hospice care at her house. And I would visit her a lot, and I remember visiting her just a few days before Sunday. And she said, "Can I talk to you about my funeral?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And she said that one passage, the book starts with an E. It's the only one you ever use. And she says, "Just make sure you use it in my funeral." And I said, "Yes, Dawn, it's Ecclesiastes." Well, it was Sunday morning, and it was, 7 o'clock or so, and the tree was on, the coffee was done, and I started putting out my sermon notes, and I got a phone call from one of her kids. And she said, my mom just died. And she said, I know you're writing your sermon, and now you're busy, you don't have to come over. And I said, wait a second. I said, I do 52 sermons a year. People can get along without a sermon. But your mom only died once. And so I went over there. And I thought to myself, what does it mean to be busy? I mean, how busy can you be? We got 24 hours a day. We choose how we use those 24 hours. So I get back to church about 8:25. And I put my robe on, and I walk into church. It was time for the sermon. I have no notes. I have no nothing except a full heart and a sad spirit, and a few Dollar Tree stores, toys gathered behind the altar. And I realized at that point that Christmas is more than a holiday. And sermon notes, as you can tell by listening to me for all these years, are highly overrated. And yes, we're all busy, especially this time of the year, but you got 24 hours and I got 24 hours, and we can choose a little bit how to use them. And I realized Jesus was born over 2,000 years ago in a humble manger, and he was hardly noticed. And yet somehow, some way, in that moment of time, 2016 years ago, he changed lives, and it changed the world. And that's why we're gathered here. Christmas is a message about Jesus being born in unexpected times, in unexpected places, because that's the power and the beauty of what this holiday is all about. And I can't help but think of Jack Mitchell today. Well, Jack and I share the same birthday. And last Christmas, Jack was in a hospital in Milwaukee. And the nurses were the shepherds. And the doctors were the wise men. And angels called him last January to a kingdom that will never, ever end. And the poinsettias come from his mom and dad's flower shop. And his smile graces my office door every day, along with my brother and my dad. And once again, I'm reminded, and sometimes I just got to be slapped on the side of the head, that Don, Christmas is not just a holiday. It will drive us nuts. And Christmas will bring out the best and the worst of each one of us at some point. But most of all, Christmas is a statement about unconditional love and the power of simplicity and the magic of the divine intersecting ordinary moments in our lives. I know each one of us spends some time worrying about our world. And I know a lot of people are angry and we're worried and we're hurt because there's so many divisions. But here in this humble place, whether it's a Thursday night or a Sunday morning or maybe a Wednesday afternoon when you come in here to pray, we try to be reminded that the power of kindness, the spirit of love, and the hope of understanding and goodness, it's worth everything. If it can't change the world, maybe it can change us in one other person. So I was at the village hall the other day paying some kind of fine for something I forgot to do. And I mentioned on Thursday night, I saw this form on the table, Volunteer of the Year. This isn't in my notes, but I remember years ago, there was a contest called Citizen of the Year for the township. And there were 2 finalists, me and her husband. And he won for good reason. And it wasn't long after that I did his eulogy. And I still think about how ridiculous contests like that really are. How do you give awards for doing good? How do you give awards? Does everything have to be an accomplishment? Anyway, I saw this award, and so I decided that I would nominate somebody. Because we live in a world of contests. But I think of all the people in the world and people in your lives who have never had a trophy, who have never had a medal draped around their neck. And we have plenty of amazing kids in our church, and some of them are sitting right here. But there is a young man in our church, his name is Richard. And he's an amazing student, he's a Boy Scout, he's the ultimate volunteer. And so I wrote a letter in the application. And I'd like to just share a few of the words with you. I took all his accomplishments and I simply stapled it to the application. And this is what I wrote. And after this, he'll never, ever get the award. There is one moment that pretty much defines Richard's character. Rick is one of those guys that believes that it's what you do with ordinary moments that defines who you are. So Rick is at the registration table for an event at Sandburg High School. And during the registration, he notices a veteran walk into the room. Rick excuses himself for a moment from the registration table and walks over to the veteran, shakes his hand, and thanks him for service to our country. Rick never said anything to anybody about that moment, but one of the parents in our church happened to notice what he did. And so I mentioned this in my sermon about ordinary moments. It was several weeks ago. And I pointed to Rick, who happened to be sitting in that section of the church with his mom. He's totally embarrassed. And as I mentioned what he did, you guys gave him a standing ovation. Because for Richard, service and volunteering is not something extra. It's a way of life. It cannot be measured in hours or plaques or awards. It's measured by what you do with your heart and soul when nobody else notices. Now I'm thinking about, Jack and Richard and Dawn. I'm thinking about birthdays. And just as I was getting ready for church, I noticed on my wall, which has stuff on my wall, and there's a letter from my son on my birthday. And it goes like this. It says, "Happy birthday, Pops. Today, let's talk about rainbows and sunsets. Let's talk about duct tape in your grandma's kitchen. Because today is the day I'm going to count my blessings." And so I think about a lady named Dawn, a kid named Jack, a young man named Richard, rolls of duct tape, and grandma's kitchens. And then I think of a baby who was born in Bethlehem. And I realize once again that no moment is so small or so ordinary that it can't become the soil out of which the Christ child can be born in our hearts today. Amen. If you're able to, please rise for the creed. It's on page 105.